Right now, we're in the midst of the crisis of the 3rd century. In the last episode, I laid out the main ways of looking at that period. Was it truly a period of crisis, or should we think of it more as a transition? Well, in today's episode, I want to begin by talking about a subject which is central to the crisis narrative, and that is the collapse of the Roman monetary system. And to do this, we're actually going to go back to the very beginning of Roman coinage and talk about the system that was set up and how stable it was so that we can better understand what happened around the 3rd century that led to the demise of one of the world's most stable and long-lasting monetary system. How did the Roman Empire ruin its own currency? What could they have done differently to avoid collapse? And what were the consequences in the 3rd century? We'll talk about those issues on this episode of the Pax Romana podcast. Episode 73, The Collapse of the Roman Monetary System. When Augustus came to power in 31 BC, which we talked about at the very beginning of this podcast, he did not need to reform, substantially at least, the Roman monetary system. When Augustus took over, the silver denarius had already been circulating for almost 200 years. There had been very few changes in its weight and silver fineness. It was a coin of nearly pure silver. Its exchange rate with other coins in the Roman system had been relatively stable, only changing one time in its 200-year history. The denarius was the bedrock, not just of the Roman monetary system, but it was a respected currency even beyond Roman borders. It was imitated by peoples in India. Denarius coins are found in parts of the world that the Romans never conquered. It was that trusted and reliable of a currency. So when Augustus took over, he kept the monetary system mostly as it was, although he formally added a gold coin to the system. So the Roman monetary system was a tri-metallic system. There was a gold coin, which could be used for transactions involving very expensive goods. Then there was the silver denarius with its trustworthy reputation. And then there were several smaller denominations made out of copper or alloys of copper, like bronze or even brass. The benefit of this system is that each coin in the system was made out of a metal that held value, apart from their value in the coinage. In other words, the coin values were backed by something real. These were not fiat coins, where simply the power of the state guaranteed their value. On the other hand, this came with some disadvantages. If the bullion value of these metals became quite different than the exchange value of the coins, so for example, the exchange rate between the main gold coin, the aureus, and the denarius, the main silver coin, was 1 to 25. For every 1 gold coin, you could get 25 silver coins in change. But what if the values of gold and silver as metals changed significantly because of market conditions or mining discoveries or an influx of one precious metal into the Roman economy, as it did, for example, after the sack in Jerusalem in 70 AD? So much gold was melted down from the Roman reconquest of Judea that the value of gold fell. And as a result, the exchange rate between the gold coin in the Roman monetary system and the silver coin in the Roman monetary system was distorted. What happened, for example, if the metal in the gold coin became far more valuable than just 25 silver coins? What if the real value of the metal in the gold coin was worth the equivalent amount of metal in, say, 50 silver coins? Well, what was likely to happen is people would not use the gold coins as money. They would just melt them down into metal. Because if the gold wasn't in the form of a coin and it was just a hunk of metal, somebody could trade that hunk of metal for 50 silver coins rather than 25 silver coins as they could when the metal was in the form of a coin. So you would get moments of demonetization if the metal values of the gold and silver coins changed dramatically. Now, one solution to this was for the Roman mint authorities to adjust the amount of metal in the coins, either by reducing the weight of the coin overall, or by keeping the weight the same, but adulterating the coin with a little bit more base metal and a little bit less precious metal. And some scholars think that this is exactly what the Roman state did. So, for example, when Nero debased the silver denarius, taking out about 20 to 25% of the silver in that coin, some historians believe that what Nero was doing was not trying to deceive the population, that he was not greedily siphoning out silver from the coin, but that he was in fact trying to adjust for a denarius that was overvalued because the metal value of silver had gone up relative to the metal value of gold. There's a certain logic to this argument. Here's the problem that I see with this. Only a few times in Roman history was the quality of coins ever improved. And when that happened, it was temporary, it was fleeting. Almost all changes in the standards of Roman coinage go one way, towards debasement and devaluation. That does not suggest to me a Roman state that is carefully trying to manage the money to preserve its exchange rate and ensure that people are not melting down the coins. Rather, it seems to me like what's happening is Roman emperors or the Roman mint are gradually but purposefully extracting metal from the coins in order to spend more money. And either they don't understand the consequences of that or they don't care about them. So when Nero debased the denarius after the Great Fire of 64 AD, it seems far more likely to me that he just needed to pay for his grand golden palace, and he just didn't have the silver to do it. And so he just debased his coinage so that he could mint more coins and pay for the palace that way. Nero's debasement was pretty substantial, and it kind of redefined the monetary standard of the denarius. And for the most part, that held all the way up until the reign of the Emperor Septimius Severus. There were a few tinkerings here and there. Certainly Commodus debased the currency, for example. But it was really Septimius Severus who abruptly and dramatically took about 50% of the silver out of the denarius. And then it was Caracalla after him, as we talked about in a previous episode, who debased the currency even more by just abandoning the denarius, minting his new coin, what we call the Antoninianus, a double denarius, in the hopes of deceiving the money-using population, but which in reality increased skepticism of imperial money. And it is around the time of Caracalla that we see some strong indications in other sources that people are becoming skeptical of Roman money. This is an inscription from southwestern Asia Minor, from the city of Mylassa, and it preserves a decree of the city council, which suggests that that city, if not others, were having serious problems with the use of money in the marketplaces. Here's what the decree says. If anyone, whether free or slave, other than the one who has leased and operated the city bank, is apprehended exchanging or purchasing currency in any way whatsoever, he shall be brought before the banker upon information laid before the council by any of the citizens. The security of our city is shaken by evildoing and villainy of a few people who take advantage and embezzle public property. By their agency, an exchange crisis has invaded the marketplace, preventing the city from obtaining necessities so that the people are without resources and the public is in want. For this reason also, the provision of the tribute to our lords, the emperors, is delayed. That's an inscription from 210 AD in the city of Mylassa. It's a little bit complicated, perhaps, to understand what the inscription is saying, so let me parse it out for you. The city of Mylassa, like many cities in the Roman Empire, had set up a monopoly exchange bank. That is, you could not just exchange coins with anybody. You had to use one bank, which was often just one guy or one family. They collected a fee every time you traded money. And we're not talking about trades of Roman currency for foreign currency. We're really talking about trades from, say, gold coinage to silver coinage, or silver coinage to bronze coinage. In other words, you could not simply go to a store and ask for the store to make change for you. You had to do that through a bank so that the banker could get his fee. But in this case, the citizens of the city of Mylasa are not using the bank, despite the fact that they are compelled by law to do so. Why aren't they doing that? Because the nominal exchange rates of the coins, the gold coins, the silver coins, and the copper-based coins, are wildly different because of debasement than the value of the metals in the coins. And so what people are doing is trading coins among themselves at values that better reflect the actual conditions on the market for those metals. So instead of trading, say, a denarius for 4 sesterces, which would be the normal exchange rate, they might be trading a denarius for 2 sesterces because the denarius has been substantially debased. There is, in effect, a black market in money rising up, at least in this city, and likely in others already at the beginning of the 3rd century. And things would only get worse as emperors began increasingly raising more and more armies, paying the troops larger and larger salaries. They did so by further debasing the silver coinage, such that by the time we get to the mid-3rd century, so just about 40 years after this edict in the 250s, the silver coins of the Roman Empire have only about 5% silver. They are silver coins in name only. They don't look silver, they aren't made of silver, and everybody knows it. You could see it. Because there are different emperors during the mid-3rd century ruling different parts of the empire, there are wildly different monetary standards. Some coins are really crude looking at this time. The quality control in mints is just terrible. Now, could emperors have improved the quality of coinage? They did not have the silver and gold bullion to do this. So they would have had to dramatically decrease their expenditures. And that, of course, meant they would have had to stop paying excessively large salaries to the soldiers. And if they did that, they would likely face rebellion among their own troops, and they would be out of power and likely dead. So they kind of couldn't do that. It was a fiscal option, but it was not a political option. And so the debasement just continued. And instead of fixing the debasement, what mints decided to do was to do the equivalent of security theater. That is, they put on a show of quality control without actually improving the coins. This was done by putting mint marks on Roman coins. Around the 250 ADs, during the time of really the worst debasement of the Roman silver coins, we begin to see marks on the coins that are meant to show which mint minted the coins, and in some cases, which workshop within the mint minted the coins. And the sense here was, hey, look, coin users, we know that these coins look pretty bad, but we promise you there's some accountability here. We're actually tracking the coins. We're doing this on purpose. This is not really the monetary crisis that it looks like it is. Of course, that was a lie. And it doesn't appear that the mint marks provided much confidence in the Roman coins. We can see this in a papyrus that dates from this exact period, the middle of the 3rd century, from the city of Oxyrhynchus in Egypt. And listen to what was happening in that city. The public officials of Oxyrhynchus have assembled and have accused the bankers of the exchange banks of having closed their banks because of their unwillingness to accept the divine coin of the emperors. It has become necessary to issue an order to all the owners of the banks to open their banks and to accept and exchange all coins except the absolutely spurious and counterfeit, knowing full well that if they disobey this order, they will experience the penalties which the magnificence of the prefect has imposed upon them even before this time. That's Oxyrhynchus Papyrus 1411, dated to the mid-3rd century. So this is in Egypt, not in Asia Minor, but what we see here is a similar situation. Now, Oxyrhynchus is a larger city, tens of thousands of people, and so it has multiple exchange banks that are officially contracted by the state. Now, instead of a black market in money operating, we see that even the official banks themselves cannot continue to sustain exchange in debased currency. The currency has become so bad that the banks themselves cannot turn a profit and are just closing down. It is probably also the case that money in this city and Egypt was a highly monetized society, may have been falling into disuse, and that people were increasingly resorting to outright barter and exchanging of favors and other non-monetary goods and services because the Roman imperial money had become so unreliable. It's amazing to see how quickly a currency system that began after the Second Punic War in the 3rd century BC and had been stable up until the very beginning of the 3rd century AD had so rapidly fallen apart, such that even large cities could not sustain the monetary system. In the 4th century, silver as a currency would effectively disappear. The Roman denarius, which had been the bedrock of the Roman monetary system, vanished forever. Its brand, built on hundreds of years of reliability, was ruined in just a few decades. Instead, the emperors turned to gold. But like I said, this wouldn't be until the 4th century. For the rest of the 3rd century, no doubt due to the constant civil wars and foreign wars, it was just not possible for any emperor to muster the kind of lasting authority to tackle the problems in the Roman monetary system. There was one brief attempt that was made by the only crisis-era emperor to control the entire empire for a brief period of time. His name was Aurelian. Aurelian ruled from 270 AD to 275, just 5 years. That seems short compared to the reigns of the Pax Romana, but in the 3rd century crisis, when the average length of an imperial reign was 1.5 years, Aurelian's 5 years actually is a long time. Now, during much of that 5 years, Aurelian was reconquering the empire. It had been split up into 3 separatist states. So he was a very busy man. But he did reform the monetary system, and the mint workers did not like this. He actually faced a rebellion of the mint workers in Rome, which he suppressed by murdering a good deal of them. What was the reform that he put forward? It wasn't a return to a full silver coin. Instead, he basically told the truth. That was his reform. So instead of putting fake mint marks on the coins, he put a mark on the coin which told people the actual amount of silver in the coin. The mark is XX and then a space and then I. In other words, 20 XX to 1. 20 parts copper to 1 part silver. That is a coin of 5% silver. He put this mark on all of his silver coins, letting people know that yes, they were right. The coins had been debased. And finally, the government was going to acknowledge it and accept the consequences. And the consequences were very severe. During the years of Aurelian, prices jump up about tenfold in the Roman Empire. This must have been a shock to the system. At the same time, Aurelian, by finally being honest about what the government had done, restored confidence in the monetary system. It's true that there was no longer a coin of pure silver, but there was at least a coin with some silver, and the government was being honest about the amount, and prices were finally allowed to reflect the value of coins, and people probably started using the coins again. Aurelian was willing to accept the short-term pain, the major economic inflation that followed, in order to get people using money again. Aurelian, however, would be murdered, his reforms eventually undone, and it would take other emperors like Diocletian and then Constantine to enact much more sweeping reforms in the 4th century. Aurelian did a lot in his 5 years, and as I mentioned, it was quite a long time for the 3rd century. And so in the next episode, I'd like to talk about the tangled mess of civil wars and foreign wars that led to the deaths of so many emperors and the exponential rise in usurpers and rebels in the Roman Empire. More on the crisis of the 3rd century in the next episode of the Pax Romana podcast.
Thanks for listening to the Pax Romana podcast. For more information, including a list of primary sources and further reading, check the show notes. Music by Red Productions and Exocore. Follow Professor Colin Elliott on X at ProfCPE or email colin@paxromanapodcast.com. Listen to more episodes on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or just about anywhere podcasts are available. Stay tuned for the next episode of the Pax Romana podcast.